Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We're so glad to have so many people here. Hope you're having a lovely time as fall is kind of settling across the country. It's not too cold, not too hot wherever you are. Today's presentation is entitled Leaving No Stone Unturned, Exploring Non-Traditional Qualifying Activities. My name is Justin Settles. I am the project specialist for the Identification and Recruitment Consortium. For those that might not be familiar with the IDRC consortium, we're a collection of states from all over the country that are working together in order to help improve IDNR efforts and resources available for recruiters out there. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Agriculture and the fishing industries are both very large and complex. They involve a lot of different types of jobs, and many jobs in fishing, and while many jobs in agriculture and fishing can be easy to identify as qualifying activities, there are also those qualifying activities that recruiters may come across that can be difficult to spot, that can be difficult to understand for even experienced recruiters. And so this presentation today is all about how we as recruiters, as identification and recruitment staff, can look at some of those difficult qualifying activities, decide whether they're difficult jobs, decide whether or not they are a qualifying activity, and then we're going to take a look at a couple qualifying activities that we might miss out in the field, such as work in the fishing industry, in the food processing industry. Every state has their primary crops or industries that recruiters encounter regularly. We all have our areas that we go to that we know very well. We know the key farms that are in place. We know the places that we have to go and check every year. However, there is more agriculture out there. And so while recruiters, have even recruiters with lots of experience often know their primary industries well, and they can easily identify them, it's important for us to know what else is out there so we can continue to find and explore and locate those students that we might be missing. It can be easy for recruiters to focus entirely on those primary industries and overlook many of the businesses or industries that they may not have experience with. For example, it can be easy for recruiters in an area with a lot of dairy farms or even a lot of processing plants to miss the seasonal qualifying work that might be in their area because they don't have as much experience working in those industries. And so it's important for us to expand and make sure we're being balanced and looking at all possible routes for finding students. If we only focus on those primary industries in your area, we can miss out on finding an entire group of students who might be eligible. And this is especially important these days as we're noticing all around the country, states, numbers, student numbers, student counts, they're plateauing, or in some places, they're dropping. And so when we're seeing numbers start to decrease, it makes it even more crucial for us to make sure that we're being as thorough as possible and following any and all routes that we might need in order to find and locate new students. It's important for us, like I said, to be balanced in our efforts, to focus, both on seasonal and temporary workers, and to continue to explore all possible qualifying work in our areas to ensure that we are finding and locating all students. To help you identify what activities are in fact qualifying activities, it is important for recruiters to know all the different resources that they have available to them for identifying qualifying activities. To begin with, it is really important for all recruiters to be well versed in the Non-Regulatory Guidance, or NRG, and know how to properly use it to determine whether or not a job may in fact qualify as qualifying work. As I've worked with recruiters all over the country, it can be surprising how many recruiters out there, aren't familiar with the NRG. While they get trained on eligibility, I've found that a lot of recruiters out there oftentimes don't read through the guidance regularly, don't follow up by rereading the rules to know exactly what the guidance has to say. And recruiters, to be at the top of their games, have to make sure that they are always aware of the guidance, following the information provided, and be able to use it to the best of their abilities. For those that are unfamiliar, the Non-Regulatory Guidance, or NRG, is the recruiting rule book. The Non-Regulatory Guidance is the book produced by the Federal Office of Migrant Education, or OME, and features all the rules and regulations that govern the migrant education program. Jessica has kindly posted the link in the chat where you can go to find and access the Non-Regulatory Guidance. You can download it from the OME legislation page to find and read through it yourself if you haven't done so already. Chapter 2 of the Non-Regulatory Guidance is the one that we're really going to be focusing on today, because Chapter 2 of the Non-Regulatory Guidance is the chapter that helps for determining eligibility. Chapter 2 contains all the rules that govern the eligibility of migrant students, and more importantly, what is considered to be qualifying work. So specifically, when you go to the Non-Regulatory Guidance, you're going to open it up, and it's divided into chapters, and then within each chapters, there's going to be different sections that cover different topics. So question C4, or that's question 4 in section C of the Non-Regulatory Guidance, is the question that governs and determines and defines what the term qualifying work is. According to the Non-Regulatory Guidance, the qualifying work means any work that is temporary employment or seasonal employment for personal subsistence in agriculture or fishing. Sections F and sections G on page 24 and page 29 of chapter 2 of the Non-Regulatory Guidance breaks it down even farther and reviews in depth what recruiters must know in order to determine if a job can be considered seasonal or temporary and work in agriculture or the fishing industry. We recommend that recruiters read through the guidance, especially chapter 2 of the guidance, at least once every 2 months. Read through sections F and G to make sure that you're always well knowledgeable and on top of the rules that are governing qualifying work. Oftentimes, we may encounter things that we don't have as much experience with. And, if we haven't been following along with the guidance, if we haven't, been reading it to make sure, we have it fresh in our memories, there's a lot of things that we might forget. It's important, though, to note that as we go through and read the guidance does not contain a list of activities that definitely do or do not count as qualifying work. You might read through the guidance, and in some locations, you might find examples of what could be considered qualifying work. So as you read through the guidance, for example, you'll find it'll list examples of what could be considered work in initial processing, or what could be considered, work in the harvesting or production of a crop. But however, the list is not comprehensive. And so it's important that we as recruiters must be able to think critically, and we have to be able to learn to read through the rules that are provided and learn how to take those rules and make our own decisions out in the field. One of the things that I've noticed as I've worked with recruiters all over the country is that I've found oftentimes that our recruiters can be really hesitant to trust in themselves and to trust in their instincts and to trust themselves to make choices. This is especially true when they encounter new qualifying activities, because I've oftentimes found recruiters are afraid to be wrong. But we as recruiters, we shouldn't be afraid to make a decision out in the field. As long as you are doing the work to make sure that you're reading through your guidance, reading through your information, you will most likely make the correct decision. And the most important thing, as long as you have the knowledge to back up the decision that you're made and to be able to support the decision using the rules that are contained in the guidance, you're going to be supported there. And so one of the things that I've noticed a lot of times, recruiters, there'll be a lot of issues that will come up. Jessica and I had a conversation this morning about a particular qualifying activity going back and forth with the state. And as long as you are able to support it and show, like, in the guidance, this says this, and so this is why I believe this, you're not going to be incorrect. And additionally, all states, as part of their quality control procedures, should have a protocol for tackling any questions related to eligibility. If you ever have any questions that you are not able to answer yourself or encounter tricky things out in the field, always reach out to your supervisor to let them know your question so it can be answered through the proper channels. We have one comment in chat that says they don't make decisions alone. They always contact their IDNR coordinator. And that's what I'm talking about here is, we always have support, whether that be from people above us. And, our IDNR coordinators have the capability to go to state directors who have the capability of go directly to OME and ask questions directly to the Federal Office of Migrant Education. And so there are formal channels that exist for questions to be answered, to be asked and answered. And so even if, you find a situation that you are not able to answer for yourselves, reach out to somebody else and ask them as well. Additionally, Jessica and IDRC is always available to help you work through any questions, especially about eligibility, qualifying work that you may have. So to identify if a job can be considered qualifying work, it's always important to collect as much information as possible about the job. The better you understand the job and its role in the agricultural process, the easier it will be for you to be able to determine if it is qualifying work. We've had a lot of instances where recruiters, have gone out, found a job, and then, not been able to make a decision. And, even after that, maybe they'll initially decide it's not eligible, but once they collect more information, they in fact find out it can count as qualifying work. This is especially true, with some jobs that have multiple steps in them. It may be that one of the steps in the job might not be or considered qualifying work, but there could be other steps in the job that are. And so it's really, really, really important for you to do research and ask questions. Always ask questions so that you can learn as much about the job as possible. When you encounter those new jobs out in the field that you may be unfamiliar with, like I said, ask questions, be humble. I personally have found that for me, what works really well is just if I just straight up admit to the farmer or to the worker, hey, I don't know anything about this. Can you explain it to me? They're much more likely to teach you. Farmers and workers oftentimes get excited when they hear people are interested in what it is they're doing, and they'll explain it to you. Sometimes you can even ask them to show you and demonstrate the process. I've gone to farms where farmers will literally take me step by step, showing me how a specific job on the farm works, or gone to a processing plant where they show you specifically how a specific process or job at the plant works. And so as long as you're asking questions, being humble about it, being willing to put yourself out there and learn, many times they'll explain it to you and teach you so that you can know what you need to know in order to decide if it is in fact qualifying work. So some important questions to ask when you're out there trying to learn about potential qualifying work, ask what is the job? What is the task? Where is it performed in the farm? Is it performed out in the fields? Is it performed in a processing plant? Is it performed in a warehouse? Where is this job done? What is the actual product that's being involved here? What are they trying to grow? What animal are they trying to, produce? Are they trying to make milk? What is happening? What happens before and after this job? This is especially important when you're trying to decide, whether work is part of the production or initial processing, is knowing exactly where it falls within the line. And so asking, what happens before and after. Asking when is the job performed? This is really crucial for helping you to know sometimes whether work is seasonal or temporary. Trying to figure out when during the year the job is performed. How often the job is performed, again, is important for deciding if it's seasonal or temporary. And then how many people have the same job or task. This is crucial because maybe you'll find a new job that you've found is qualifying work, that you believe is qualifying work, and you in fact find out that there's a few other people or many other people that are doing the same job. So now it went from finding one person that might be eligible to now finding multiple people that might be eligible. Sarah from Idaho says in her chat that they've had some great tours of farms and processing plants just by asking if they can come. I think that's a terrific idea. Maybe, that could be a great way to open the door, especially, for larger plants. Say, for example, you have a Tyson processing plant or chicken processing plant in your area, just reaching out and say, hey, we have families that we serve that work here. Can you give us a tour of the plant so we can learn more about it so that we can better know what our families are doing? And then you're in the door there learning. And so always ask questions. You can also use the internet or state documentation to help you learn more about potential qualifying work. As I was researching this presentation, as I've done research in the past, I've always been surprised at how much information is actually out there and put out there by states' Department of Agriculture websites. Many state Department of Agriculture websites, or even wildlife and fishing resource websites, can be searched to find crucial information about a state's agriculture or aquaculture industries. We have one quick question in chat that says, there are cannabis fields here. Does that count? So specifically when it comes to cannabis, because cannabis is not a federally legalized industry, it is not considered an agricultural product. And so OME put out a statement, stating that until it is not counted as a qualifying activity until it is federally legalized. And there, in fact, just yesterday, there was news out about a Republican senator or Republican congresswoman from South Carolina who is proposing a new legalization bill that looks to actually make cannabis a plant governed by the USDA, to remove it from the watch list. And so it's something interesting to keep out for, because if that bill that has support from both Democrats and Republicans comes out, it could be an agricultural product and it could count as a qualifying activity in the future. But for now, it doesn't. But as I mentioned, many states' Department of Agriculture websites can be searched. You can search Google in order to find information about your state's agricultural industries. So just to give you an example, some of the things that I found while going through this website, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in Michigan published a document that they call the Michigan Agriculture Facts and Figures Book. And it's a document that highlights each of the state's crops. It has a section that says exactly when it's in season. And so it'll tell you the months that it's grown. And there's even a contact information box to tell you who you need to contact in Michigan in order to talk to them about the specific crop. And so you can see I put the link to that document for anybody that's interested, especially anybody from Michigan that's interested to looking over. And, again, I just found it just by Googling Michigan Department of Agriculture, searching through the Department of Agriculture. So it's really, really important to search. Another great example, I found that the state of New Jersey, their Department of Agriculture, has a website dedicated to the seafood industry. And so this whole website talks about the different types of aquaculture that exist within New Jersey, all of the different, it even shows the different processors that you can go through and explore. And so the website still looks to be a few years old, but it's an important starting point. So you can look and see, who are the processors for seafood in the state of New Jersey? What kind of fish and shellfish are being produced there? And so these are just two examples of what exists out there if you search for it and look and try to find what you can. And so look for your own state's Department of Agriculture websites, go through them. Michigan had it through their Department of, Rural Agriculture and Rural Development. So look and see other departments as well to see what you can find. Be sure to take as many notes as possible while you're asking questions, talking in the field, speaking to farmers or workers, or even while you're conducting online research about the potential qualifying work. Because if you have encountered this job, it is likely that other recruiters, whether that be recruiters in your state, in your area, or even recruiters in another state, might encounter the same job. And you can always help and share the documentation and notes with them. Maybe it's important that we keep information, pass it on from recruiter to recruiter, so that if one recruiter leaves, that information doesn't leave with them. And so making sure you're taking proper notes, making sure you're documenting everything. If you find a good online website or resource, you find something produced by your state, write down the URL, share it, save it in a document shared with other recruiters so that it's there, so that everybody knows about it, so that everybody can use it. Similarly, if you believe that a job or activity that you find can lead to finding more students in your area or in other parts of the state, work with your supervisor to make sure that you all are creating proper documentation. Create state documentation explaining the job, the information that you obtained, and why it qualified. State documentation is critical for if there's an audit, for re-interviews, external re-interviews. If you're having somebody coming from outside the state that might not properly understand the work that is done, having that state documentation to support it, your decisions, and explain the process is really crucial for getting people caught up. It's important for new recruiters, if they're getting out there, that they can look and see the documentation that exists so that they can learn. Even for me, from an outside perspective, when conducting and creating this presentation, I reached out to several states and read through state documentation that they were able to provide me about some of the activities that they see. And so it's really a great source for making sure that your decisions are supported and backed up, especially your COEs are supported and backed up, as well as a learning process. So once your research has been completed, you're now ready to see, exactly where the job or activity falls within the regulations outlined in the guidance. So to begin with, you're going to want to first determine if the job can be considered agricultural, or fishing by reading the definitions of each. As we mentioned, Chapter 2 of the NRG is the chapter that you're going to want to go through in order to read through the rules and determine if something does count as qualifying work. And so particularly question F1 of Chapter 2 of the NRG, and you can see a screenshot here of that page. It's on page 24, asks the question of what is the definition of agricultural work for the purposes of the migrant education program. And as you can see here, it says that agricultural work for the purposes of the migrant education program is the production or initial processing of raw agricultural products, such as crops, poultry, or livestock, dairy work, as well as the cultivation or harvesting of trees that is performed for wages or personal subsistence. And so when you're looking at any job, you're going to want to look and see, okay, does it fit and qualify under this definition? Is it working with an agricultural product? Maybe that be a crop, or it can be something that can be considered livestock, or something that can be considered dairy. Question F16 of Chapter 2 of the NRG defines what fishing work is. And fishing work is defined as anything that is the catching or initial processing of fish or shellfish. Shellfish is big because it's a broad topic that includes things such as crabs, oysters, shrimp, crawdads, lobsters, as well as the raising or harvesting of fish or shellfish at fish farms that is performed for wages or personal subsistence. This is also important because there are many different, for example, fisheries that are out there that look to grow fish for sustainability purposes. Many of them are even run by the Department of Agriculture as well. There are 70 different national fisheries around the country that aimed in order to produce fish, that grow and raise fish, to make sure that our waterways have fish living in them. Remember, though, that for work to be considered agriculture or fishing, it must be connected with a product that is going to be sold or consumed. The product cannot be for recreational purposes or be considered as a pet. This is especially true when we're talking about animals. One of the things that we have come up before, we're looking at different animals that are raised. Are they raised as pets? Are they raised, for example, if a farm is raising, when I was living in Tennessee, for example, there was a farm that was an emu farm that would raise emus, and they were raised as animals that people could come and visit and pet. And anybody, those are pets. They are not to be sold or consumed. And so it's especially important that you're looking at these rules, making sure that they are, in fact, an agricultural product that is going to be sold or consumed. when determining whether the work is qualifying work. So once you have been able to identify if the work is agricultural or fishing work, you're now going to have to determine if the work is part of that initial production or processing of the product. And so you're going to want to read through the definitions of the guidance and see where the job you're investigating falls in the agricultural process. So for example, question F2 on page 24 defines what production means for agricultural work. Questions F4, F5, and F18 more specifically provide examples of what kind of jobs would be considered production for agricultural and fishing work. And so whereas F2 provides a broad definition, questions F4, F5, and 18 kind of break it down a little bit more and provide more supporting details for you. The production process, that's important to note, can include all steps from preparation of the product and often ends with the collection of the agricultural product, such as the harvesting of a crop or the collection of eggs from a poultry farm, the collection of milk on a dairy. And so anything that takes you up to that point where the product is actually collected and gathered can be considered part of the production process. And so there's a lot that can go involved in that production process, even preparation. And so we have, one of the more interesting activities I've heard about is that over in the Midwest, where the soil is especially rocky, you have workers that are seasonal that come into states, like Idaho, for example, that their qualifying work is removing rocks from the field so that, plants can be planted. That is part of that initial production because it's an important step in allowing the soil to be prepared so that things can be planted. And so working through, looking to see, is the activity I'm looking at, does that come before this product is gathered or does it become after, is critical for deciding where it falls along in the agricultural process. Questions F20 on page 27 of the guidance defines, what initial processing means for agricultural and fishing work. Questions F21 through F23 on page 27 similarly provide examples of what kind of jobs would be considered initial processing in both the agricultural and fishing industries. And so I know we're kind of moving through some of these definitions, page numbers, questions quickly, but all of this information, the presentation and the recording for the webinar will be available later today on IDRC's website so that you'll have it so that you can work through yourself, have the information at hand as you're trying to decide if the jobs that you encounter are in fact qualifying activities. So when you're identifying qualifying work, it is important to remember that initial processing ends once the product has begun to be transformed or into something more refined or is packaged. A product is considered to be more refined or when it has begun to be cooked or when something is added to the product or when it has begun to be turned into a new product. So it's a great, time. We have a comment and a question in chat that I think is great for this. The question is, what about shearing sheep? We know a farmer who hires workers to assist, with shearing sheep once a year for 4 weeks. Shearing sheep, you're collecting the wool. I think a lot of that would be, what is the wool going for, going towards? Wool can be considered an agricultural product. And so I would consider that part of the production stage because again, the agricultural product in that instance is the wool itself that they are shearing from the sheep. And so it's something that they're collecting or gathering. Similarly, if it is for the health of the sheep, sometimes farmers have to shear sheep to make sure that the sheep are healthy, to make sure that they are not, getting animals with or parasites in the wool themselves. That can also be part of that initial production process. And so I would say that yes, it does. We have another person that says, what about X-raying chickens in a processing plant? I would have to know a little bit more about that and what the X-rays are used for. But oftentimes it's important to remember that, especially in processing plants, and this is something we're going to hit on here in a little bit, is that many times workers are going to be doing more than one job. And so especially in processing plants, workers are going to be transitioning from one stage to another. And so whereas they might be doing X-rays today, maybe they're doing something else next week. And so check to make sure as well, if you're not sure if one type of activity qualifies, that they haven't done any other activities as well. Jessica, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, there's an interesting phenomenon they call a woody breast in a chicken. Like sometimes it makes the meat bad. And so I've heard in the past that they've used the x-rays to just make sure that the chicken itself doesn't have any of that. And so that might be something interesting. Definitely would be a reason to look into it more. But that, your point of saying, hey, you got to know why they're doing it or whether they're working with any other part would be really important to know.
And exactly. And it all goes back to the comment that we were saying earlier. It's important to do research. It's important to ask questions. If you just hear they're taking x-rays of chickens, just hearing that, you might not be sure whether or not, that is a qualifying activity. But as you ask questions and learn more and more about it, know where it falls in that process. I've heard as well, sometimes, they'll do x-rays, for example, before the actual processing in order to see, if there's any abnormalities within the chicken that they might not want to use. Something like that can still count as a qualifying activity. So making sure that you're asking questions, doing that research, the more you know, the easier it'll be for you to make those kinds of questions. How about the care of racehorses? Care of racehorses specifically does not qualify. And so, in fact, on the results page, one of the things we're going to look up here in a bit is they have a questions and answers section. In question 8 on the results, OME's website, their policy questions answers specifically about horses. And remember, for something to be considered livestock, it cannot be for entertainment or to be counted as a pet, and racing horses is considered something as entertainment. So race horses does not count as a qualifying activity. Similarly, preparing agricultural products for delivery, such as driving forklifts to load trucks, or even hauling agricultural products away from a packing facility, does not count as qualifying work because it is no longer part of that initial processing stage. This is a question that we receive a lot from, we hear from a lot. Just to give a background about how this presentation came to be is that, we had a lot of questions about eligibility. We heard from a lot of people, and we had a lot of people submit questions that they had, whether things qualify or not. One of the common things that we would hear back is about delivery and loading trucks and even driving forklifts. But the guidance specifically states, that hauling products is not considered a qualifying activity. So if you are struggling to determine whether or not a job might be considered as production or initial processing of the guidance, look at the examples listing in the guidance and try to see if you can find a job that is similar to the one you are looking at. Oftentimes, you can make the process of determining if work is qualifying activity easier by trying to find similarities between it and another job that you are already familiar with. If you find, can think about similarities between the job, that'll help you point out and know whether something might be qualifying or not. Again, it's important to make sure that you understand all the requirements of the job when determining, if it counts as qualifying work. Some jobs may have, like I mentioned, many steps in the process. And, because they have those many steps in the process, maybe the primary job or one of the steps might not count as a qualifying activity, but there may be a step within that process that can count. So, for example, one of the states that we work with found a group of workers who moved with H-2B visas to construct hog pens and fences. The recruiters, because all the, the workers are doing construction, they originally did not know or didn't think if they would qualify. However, as they were going through researching, learning more, asking questions, they found out that the workers themselves, they actually have to herd the pigs, move the pigs out from one pen to another. Even sometimes clean the enclosures and clean the pigs before they return to their new enclosures. And so because of this, maybe the initial part of the job didn't count, but the herding of the pigs does count as a qualifying activity, because that's an important process, that's an important step in the agricultural process. And so again, this shows why it's important to do research, to learn more, to know every part of the process, every step in the job itself, because you might find something there that does qualify. We're starting to see a lot of questions again in chat. And so, we're going to have, maybe at the end of the presentation, we might have some time for some Q&As. And as always, you can send us an email as well if you have any questions that we'll be happy to answer. Remember, though, that as you are working through and identifying qualifying work, all qualifying work must also be classified as seasonal or temporary work. When deciding if work is qualifying, make sure that the worker has not been employed for longer than 12 months and is not planning on being employed at the same location for 12 months. Even seasonal workers who stay through for multiple crops cannot be employed for longer than 12 months. There must be a gap, in their employment in order for the qualifying work to be considered seasonal. And so even if a worker is staying on a farm working multiple crops, for the work to be considered qualifying work, we have to make sure that they are not being employed for longer than 12 months. Another great resource for deciding if a job is qualifying work is the OME Policy Questions and Answers website. As we mentioned earlier, OME posts answers to questions that they receive, on their website, available for anybody to follow up with. They have a great section specifically on child eligibility, IDNR. And so there's a lot on there about qualifying work. And so you can actually explore their website and look, search through, look for any potential qualifying work that you're looking into, and maybe they'll have answered something on there. As you can see, they have a search the Q&As section. So you can just type in the particular job that you're looking to find more out and hit search and scroll through to see if they've answered anything. As an example for that, somebody asked earlier about race horses. If you search horses, it'll show up and come up the question that OME answered specifically about horses on their website. A great example of the type of questions you can find on the OME policies Q&As is question 86, which is, is cricket farming considered qualifying work? Again, this is an interesting activity that people might not be familiar with, and the website goes in depth on whether or not cricket farming might be considered qualifying work. And so, it's an interesting choice, and it just goes to show you the different things that you can find on there. So now that we've talked about deciding whether or not and how to decide whether work is qualifying work, I want to kind of highlight two specific things or areas where I think we as recruiters, often miss. The first one is the fishing industry. By far, we get the most questions about qualifying work related to the fishing industry. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the commercial fishing industry in the United States employs over 1.2 million people each year. For comparison, the entire farm industry in the United States employs 2.5 million people. And so the commercial fishing industry, surveyed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which only covers fishing done on the coasts in the ocean, employs 1.2 million people. That's half of all the people that work in the farming industry. And so there's a large, vast number of people out there that are doing work that could be considered qualifying work that we are not looking into. And so it's good for us to explore and further explore the fishing industries. That 1.2 million number, by the way, as I mentioned, doesn't include those that are working in seafood processing, which could also qualify, or those that do commercial fishing in the rivers. For example, the Mississippi River sees a lot of commercial fishing, or even the Great Lakes. And so that 1.2 million number is actually much bigger in reality. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website contains a lot of useful information that can really help recruiters. It lists, you can actually download a spreadsheet that'll tell you the number of jobs in your state related to the commercial fishing industry. Again, it only tracks those that are doing in the coast. And so if you're not a coastal state, you might not find, your state listed there. But I was surprised to see, some of the states that have so many jobs available out there. As an example, Louisiana, which is a state that we've worked with and I worked closely with in developing this presentation, it said that they have 43,000 jobs in the fishing industry, and they find a lot of workers in the fishing industry. But then there's other states like Washington that have 30,000 that work in the fishing industry, or even New York, which is one of the top 5 states in the country for the fishing industry. Massachusetts has 95,000 that are working in the commercial fishing industry. So there's a lot of, it gives us good information to know, hey, there's something here that we might be missing. Similarly, there's a great glossary of common terms that you can find that'll really help you to know the fishing industry better if you can explore the website. And so Jessica posted the link to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website in chat for everybody to research and review over. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website also contains contact information for regional offices that oversee the commercial fishing industries and fish hatcheries. And so I think you can click on the link and it'll take you to the NOAA website, and you can actually see where many of their regional offices are located. And so you can see, if there's a regional office maybe, or a local office close to you that you could reach out to, that might be able to point you in the direction to provide more information. We had a question that says, wonder if Louisiana and Florida alligator trapping is an approved activity. I know for a fact that Louisiana counts alligators, and they have students that qualify for alligator farming. According to the Great Lakes, like we have the National Oceanic NOAA website, there's also the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. The Great Lakes Fishery Commission in the United States, it says that fisheries in the Great Lakes area support more than 75,000 jobs. So that's 75,000 jobs dedicated to help raising fish, in the Great Lakes area. So again, these are jobs that could all potentially be eligible. And so like the NOAA, the Great Lakes Fishery Regions oversees, the Great Lakes region, which can include, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, even, areas like New York, Vermont that are up there towards the Great Lakes. Even if your state is not on the coast or near any of the Great Lakes, many states still have commercial fishing in major rivers and fish hatcheries to help replenish the fish in the wild. As I mentioned earlier, there are 70 fish hatcheries that are overseen by the federal government that raise fish to release back out into the wild for conservation purposes. They raise them, they farm them. And so these are all jobs that could potentially qualify. And so you can actually check and see if there's a fish hatchery in your area through the Fish and Wildlife Services website. I posted the link in chat to see if one of those 70s is near you, so you can reach out to see, maybe if they hire seasonal help to help with the fish that do come in. Qualifying work in the fish industry includes work done at those fish hatcheries, fish farms, commercial fishing done in rivers, lakes, and oceans. Qualifying work also includes, all the necessary work to catch fish, which includes things such as constructing and maintaining nets. Constructing and maintaining nets is specifically included in the guidance as a qualifying activity, casting fishing lines, reeling in nets, and all the work for the initial processing of the fish. So the work done at those seafood processors that are out there. Some examples of qualifying activities in the fishing industry, just to kind of give you an idea, again, building nets, debarbing tuna. So debarbing, kind of removing the fish hooks from your catch, deheading shrimp. So, there's a job in processing the job is to remove, the heads of the shrimp from the shrimp that are going to be processed. Grading lobster, cleaning halibut, or cleaning any other type of fish that you might have, declawing crabs, freezing salmon. Oftentimes freezing of the agricultural product is included, while cooking is not considered part of the initial processing. Freezing a product so it can be packaged is still considered part of the initial processing. Gutting fish, so that's removing, the organs. Harvesting roe can be, eaten and edible. Packing crawfish, shucking oysters, trapping crabs. As well, I've seen things like removing scales can be considered a qualifying activity within the fishing industry. A lot of, it's important to note that as we're getting out there trying to learn more about the fishing industry, trying to find families that qualify, a lot of families that work in the fishing industry, are not traditional families that recruiters are used to encountering. So many families in the fishing industry might make moves that are more non-traditional. So they might make moves, for example, on their boat, moving from one area to another on a boat. And they may only spend a few weeks at a time out there on their boat. So you might encounter families who make, regular short-term duration moves for the purpose of fishing. But even if they're making short-term duration moves, those moves can still be considered qualifying. So when tracking moves that are done by boat or family, or migratory fishers, they may travel out into the water, return to the same port. It is important, to ask questions and to track where exactly they traveled in the boat so that you can track their moves. So for example, say you have a family that goes out to fish tuna. So they're out on a fishing, or a migratory fisher is out fishing tuna. The fisher may leave one port, go out into the ocean, travel up and down the coast, catching tuna, and return to the same port. That can still be considered a qualifying move, depending on the duration of the move, because they were traveling up and down the coast. And so when determining or looking at the qualifying moves for these fishers, the states that work a lot with fishing told me that they always make sure and they ask, what is the nearest port or city to where you were fishing. So as they travel up and down the coast, what is the nearest port that you were at? What is the nearest city that you were close to? So you can track where they were for that move particularly. Somebody in chat says that they used to do that with the shrimpers on the coast of Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi and Louisiana. And so, they would ask them, where they were moving along the road so that they could find where they were moving to in order to count it. Again, some fishers may make multiple short duration moves in a few months span for the fishing season. These moves, may last only 2 to 3 weeks as they're out catching fish and then have to come back to drop off their catches. Question D5 on page 21 of the NRG, looks at what is the minimum duration for a qualifying move and how recruiters can handle short-term duration moves. Question D5 again says that, although statutes and regulations are silent on the duration of a qualifying move or the minimum time a qualifying move must be, recruiters should carefully examine and evaluate regular factors, such as whether the move to work was a one-time act or a series of short moves to work in order to augment the family's income. And again, that's what we're looking at for a lot of these moves with fishers, is they might, over a period of a summer, might make 3 or 4 of these moves where they're going out for a week or 2 at a time in order to catch and come back. With respect to moves of such duration, you have to make sure that those moves are due, where a change of residence, with respect to moves of such short duration that an independent reviewer might question whether the move was a change of residence or due to economic necessity, the Department Federal Office of Migrant Education recommends that the state educational agencies or state MEP agencies establish a written policy for determining and documenting when and why these moves qualify for MEP. So again, we talked about the importance of documentation, and here's another one where if you're finding these families that are making, multiple moves, just make sure that you have the documentation. You work with your supervisor, work with your state director to have documentation explaining, why you all believe these moves should count as qualifying moves. One state that we worked with in preparing this presentation, they regularly recruit migratory fishers that perform these short-term duration moves. and they have a written policy in place stating that migratory fishers must make a minimum of 3 short-term duration moves in order for it to be considered a qualifying move. If you encounter migratory fishers that are making short-term duration moves, again, reach out to your supervisor and your state to see if you all already have a policy in place, or to see if you all can establish a policy to see if those workers do in fact qualify. Besides fish farms or commercial fishing, there are many seafood processors. There are many seafood processors along the coast and inland that process fish, shrimp, oysters, and more. And there are actually organizations out there that oversee the processing or work closely with, those that work in seafood processing. So for example, for those that are in California, Washington, or Oregon, there's an organization called the West Coast Seafood Processors Association. I don't believe it's formally a union, but it's similar to a union that is dedicated to serving those who work in the seafood processing industry. And so, there are organizations out there that are working with seafood processors. And so these are places that you can go to connect. We saw the Great Lakes fisheries that are working with fisheries. And so look to see if there's any organizations that are already working with processors in your area that you might be able to reach out to partner up with. For those that are in Oregon or Washington, the West Coast Seafood Processors Association might be good to reach out to see, if you can partner up with them to get connected with those that are working in the industry, might be able to find students that qualify through them. One important aspect that I really want to highlight, we talked about moves and how to handle moves within the fishing industry, but another important aspect that I really want to talk about is determining whether or not the work is seasonal or temporary. Especially within the fishing industry, this can be tough or tricky, and it really depends on the type of product, so the type of fish or shellfish that's at hand, as well as your state and local laws. Certain fish, shellfish, and other aquaculture products have seasons that are controlled by nature, where they are easier to catch or where their numbers are increased. So for example, in the Chesapeake Bay area, so around Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, you have blue crab season. Blue crab season is from December to March. And so this is where a lot of companies, fishers go out, commercially fish blue crab. And they do it during that time of year because the cold weather, the colder waters that are coming in from the ocean makes the crabs more docile, makes the crabs easier to catch. And so that is when the season is for them. Similarly, some states have laws that actually put legal seasons in place for fishing work. The laws prohibit fishing from taking place outside of certain months. So for example, each year, the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries analyzes the oyster population. They go in, look in the water, look to see how healthy the population is, and then use that to determine, when the oyster fishing season, oyster catching season should be. And they post it on their website. And oyster catching, commercial oyster fishing is only able to be done legally during those dates. And so again, it's important for us, to do the research. So when you're recruiting migrant fishers, go through, look at your state, try to find if there's legal seasons that are put in place by state or local governments that could govern when fishing can be done, that can determine whether the work is seasonal or temporary, and look to see if there's any natural seasons as well with the fish or shellfish in your area. So some fish or shellfish, again, might only be able to reproduce during certain times of the year, and that's when they're caught. So look up and check. We have a couple comments in chat that say check with your state's parks, wildlife, department. There's many states have departments of fishing and natural resources that you can check up on as well. Sarah asks, so is seasonal if it is part of the seasons of nature for livestock too? When it comes to livestock, that is different because much of that work, again, happens, we're talking about these are seasons because they're legal seasons that are put in place, or natural seasons conducted by the weather. Most livestock work is done throughout the year, through all 12 months of the year.
But there are a few things with livestock just to show that sometimes things are only done, like calving and things like that, or would be completely like a seasonal kind of thing. So it may depend on the ag itself, just because she had asked earlier if it was always temporary. So there can be exceptions that it could be something that could be based on a season, just by the way an animal grows or something like that.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And so, Jessica, we're seeing a lot of questions in chat, which I think is really, really great. Can we maybe send out post something on the website where me and you go through a lot of the questions that we see here and post on some answers on our website, on the IDRC website this week? That way we're able to address all the questions that we have. Because
that would be fun.
Reading everything that's coming in, and I want people to know that I read you, but we also are trying to, keep the presentation down to, we were trying to keep it down to an hour, which we're at right now. And so I want to make sure everybody is heard and that all the questions are answered. Awesome. All right. So we're going to, one thing that I do want to highlight, we're probably going to, like I said, we're going to try to keep it to an hour. So we're going to kind of end it here. But one thing I want to highlight is that something new that we're going to start doing on the IDRC website, since we get these questions about qualifying activities, non-traditional qualifying activities, we've started creating, we're calling our ag focus pages. And so our ag focus pages, we're going to be updating it, every once in a while to feature a new industry. And so each of these focus pages is all going to be about providing resources and information on, different agriculture or aquaculture industries that recruiters can go out there and search for, that hopefully they'll be able to find more students for. And so the first ag focus page that we have is all about the fishing industry and how to provide, some information and resources to help us recruit maybe more students in the migrant fishing industry. And so be on the lookout for that. It's available on the IDRC website right now. Jessica posted the link in chat, and we're really looking forward to be able to share more information, answering more questions, and bringing more attention to other industries where we might be able to find students that could qualify. Awesome. All right. Well, like I said, we're trying to keep this to an hour. So, to respect everybody's time. And so I really appreciate everybody coming together here. I think this was a really important topic to discuss. Important topic, all about, how to identify qualifying information. We do ask for everybody to complete, one of our survey training review forms. As part of, our federal grant, we do, ask that you fill out the form so we can know how we're doing, so we can make sure that we're providing the best training possible. There's also a spot on there where you can let us know about any trainings that you might be interested in. Again, we're going to be posting the IDRC, the recording of this presentation and a copy of the presentation to the IDRC webpage later on today. In fact, I will show you all right now where you can go and find it. So at the IDR website, it's idr.consortium.net. When you go to the IDRC website, one of the first things you'll see here where it says access the IDRC recruiter learning portal. One of the first things you see, you click on that as well. And this is where you can access all previous webinars done by IDRC, produced by IDRC, as well as other learning materials. So we'll make sure we'll have the webinar up here available for everybody later today. It'll also be posted on the our IDRC YouTube page, and I'll share it on the IDRC Facebook page as well. So there'll be multiple places that you can go and find it. So again, thank you all so much. We had a lot of questions that came in today. Really appreciate it. If you all have any other questions, feel free to reach out. My email address is here on the screen, and I'll post it in chat. And so if you have any other questions about any other qualifying activities reach out to us and we'll gladly answer them for you. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for joining us today.